So it was a complete crash course. It was like, 7 hours a day or more, like contact hours of online teaching students and figuring out how this works. And then taking all of that I was learning and going directly into training teachers to teach online. And like the turnaround was amazing. It was an amazing experience in terms of learning.
Hello, Shannon. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Back again. We spoke a few weeks ago, and it's really great to see you again. I guess you're still in sunny Southern California.
I am, yes, for a few more weeks. So apologies for the kind of simple background setup, but I'm away from home, but it's nice to be here. Yeah.
Fantastic. So last time we spoke, we kind of realized that we were kind of like ships passing in the night. We had kind of like a similar career paths before, but why don't you tell people who are watching on my channel here a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background and how you end up here talking with me today.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm, of course, in the English language teaching industry. I started off as an English teacher and then became more of a senior teacher trainer. I'm also a CELTA tutor, an official CELTA trainer. I haven't done that so much anymore these days because what I really do now is work on TEFL Horizons, which is the company that I started, which provides resources to basically anybody in the English language teaching industry. And so I pretty much work on that full time remotely, which is why I'm able to be here in San Diego instead of at home. And I love it. So most of the time these days, I'm training teachers through TEFL Horizons. I do a course that helps teachers develop their online teaching skills and a podcast as well, which I interviewed you for not that long ago, and all kinds of other good stuff.
Fantastic. Well, we'll get to that a little bit later on, but just at this vantage point, I've been on your website and I've seen everything you've had to do, so I highly recommend it, and I will be putting links down below for everybody to find. No, because it's really a fantastic resource. A lot of the people that watch this integrated skills channel are really looking for similar things, so it's fantastic material. But tell me, what attracted you in the first place to the whole world of English language teaching, this whole industry we find ourselves in?
I think it's maybe similar to how a lot of people found themselves in this industry, is that I was first attracted to the idea of traveling and these kind of intercultural experiences more than the actual teaching. So I graduated with a bachelor's degree, from my university studies, with a degree in English language and literature. So I was always really into language, always loved English and grammar and all of that stuff, but it had nothing to do with teaching English. It was just, I liked reading stuff and talking about it. So I ended up graduating a bit earlier than I was expecting, and immediately had this kind of like existential crisis and realized that I knew a lot about Shakespeare and nobody cared. Like there was nothing that I could do with that. And I sort of realized like, oh, and now I'm supposed to get a job and I have no idea what I want to do or how any of my skills or knowledge is really applicable. So like a lot of people, I decided to stall for time and took a kind of backpacking trip through Europe. Worked all summer, saved up money, did that. And just fell in love with the idea of being abroad and having this experience. And so I thought, how can I make that happen? Teaching English seems like a way that I could do that. But I knew nothing about teaching, as I said. So I decided to do a training course. Ended up doing a CELTA, getting my CELTA certification. And what really surprised me was that even though I had really thought of doing this course as like a means to an end to support my new travel addiction, what I found on my CELTA course was that something really clicked. And it just felt right. And I realized I actually really like teaching, and this makes sense to me. And so I went abroad. I taught for a while in Budapest and other places. And I very quickly realized like, this isn't just a, wasting time thing while I figure out what I want to do. This is what I want to do. And so, stayed in the industry and here we are. I haven't changed career paths since.
Fabulous. I really, that really resonates with me, that, starting out kind of as a means to an end, but finding out, oh no, wait, this is a calling to
This
me,
is
and
the, yeah,
this is
exactly.
what I'm looking for. And then it's a great feeling that when you're taking your CELTA and then beyond, that this is what I should be doing, and this is what I need to take that next step. You know, things start to become very clear in terms of career path.
Yes,
It's a nice feeling.
absolutely.
You mentioned that you have that background studying literature and all of those things. I heard it said once that the study of the classics, it often gets that criticism. Oh, like you can't, it doesn't apply to banking or engineering or.
Hmm.
But what I heard it said, and I'd like to get your thought on this, is that like it requires a rigor. It requires a lot of dedication and a lot of uh, giving yourself to that cause. And then I just wonder then if that becomes like a transferable skill later in life when you start traveling, and then you look to, how am I going to survive in this world of traveling? Did you find any, I guess, here's my question. Did you find any lessons learned from what you studied in university to when you started traveling and getting into ELT?
I think so. I think maybe part of the rigor that you mentioned is just kind of, in a way, going to school or getting a university degree in general. Like, I think I'm getting a bit cynical of the whole university experience a bit, where it feels like we're not really learning applicable skills. It's more just like you need to prove that you can show up somewhere on time for 4 years and like put in the work and do what people tell you to do, which is one thing. But I do feel like specifically studying literature or something that's a little bit artistic or cultural, or it's sort of more in that vein, like liberal arts kind of, I think it does really focus on communication. And so for me, that was actually hugely valuable, that you're literally learning how to read between the lines and sort of imbue meaning into these different interactions and experiences, and maybe pick up things that aren't necessarily right on the surface. And so that certainly I've carried with me in thinking about, okay, even in this situation where maybe someone's not communicating super directly or exactly the way that I would expect, because of cultural differences or whatever it is, or language barriers, what does this interaction really mean? And how can I kind of pick up the thesis or like the key message that's happening here and react? So maybe in that sense, yeah.
That's something that I found when the further and further I got into the life of a teacher, that I would realize that I'm paying much more attention to, the words themselves and what are their meanings, like when you talk about the, I guess, transferable skill, to use that term again, and that you got in terms of communication, because after all, that is the aim of our game, and if you have that kind of background, it certainly has to be a big boon as you go out into your career.
Yeah, and certainly helped with analyzing things like functional language and grammar, and why do we choose to say this particular thing in this particular way, and if we change it just a little bit, what does that mean, and how does that affect the formality and the situation and kind of the message that you're getting across, even if you're saying almost the same thing in terms of really basic meaning.
So that brings a thought to my mind, which actually in some ways segues into the main topic of what we were thinking about talking about today. When you think about what is behind what a person is saying, like functional language, for example, like what is the illocutionary force, or what are they trying to say? Do you think at all that the medium makes a difference? I remember in years gone by, putting students back to practice phone calls kind of thing,
Yeah.
And now with the past 2 years, we've gone through so much of our profession, and teaching has moved to this online environment. And I guess the first question I have on that is linked to what you were saying. What impact do you think that has, first, on your role as a teacher, on picking up on what the student is, trying to say, or reading between the lines, or do you think that the online environment has had any impact on that, or is it just the same as if you're in the classroom?
That's a good question. I think it can be similar, and of course it can also be really different. So certain things are harder, like even if students all have their cameras on, if you have a bigger class, you can't necessarily see all of your students at the same time. Like you don't get the video thumbnails of everybody. And if you do, even if you're sharing your screen, you know, they're like this big. So it's like, how can I can't pick up as well on my students' experience and subtle kind of body language cues that might in the physical classroom show me that they're frustrated or they're excited or they want to say something or they have a question, but they're too embarrassed to ask. Like you can kind of pick up on those things in person and it's much harder online. So it does take some creativity and some kind of workaround. And I call it virtual classroom management, right? Which is different than normal classroom management. You need to think about how to manage the classroom in a different way, where maybe you do implement other policies and you have to be more explicit about, okay, you know, if you have a question, type it into the chat or use the raise hand. Like, what exactly do you want students to do? Because the obvious thing that just look up at you and, you know, hey, they can't do that. So yeah, that is something. On the other hand, though, there are some things that are, and we can get into this obviously more deeply in a second, but things that are really cool about teaching online, like what you said about putting students back to back. Like I used to think a lot about how do we mimic this kind of real life communication in the classroom, which feels very stilted. Well, now students don't have to be back to back to have a phone conversation. Turn off your camera and you're on the phone. You're literally already on a phone conversation, right? So it does feel more authentic, weirdly, in that way, that when we're trying to create these kind of like outside the classroom experiences, we're already outside the classroom. So that's pretty cool.
Let's just, wind the clock back 2 years, you know, before we all really, you know, took that virtual classroom management bull by the horns. And tell me what it was like for you at the beginning of COVID. How did you feel? Like, what did you kind of envisage coming down the path, like professionally, and how does that then match up what panned out?
Yeah, it was, I mean, I think for me, like for almost everybody, probably it was very surreal at the beginning. And it, as things kind of started to close down and it became apparent that like, okay, this is really happening. At first it felt like sort of a snow day. Like it had that kind of ethereal, like everything has paused feeling. And then it kind of dreamlike, right? And then it sort of transitioned into like, oh, this isn't going away. This could actually be more of a nightmare, and kind of figuring out how to make things work. But on a professional level, I think I was very fortunate in a couple of ways. The first thing was that TEFL Horizons, so at the time I was still working, it was actually very much before the pandemic, I was still working with my co-founder, Lauren Harrington. And we've since very amicably kind of parted ways. We both realized that TEFL Horizons was kind of more my passion, and she was more interested in materials design and is now working as a curriculum designer. But anyway,
awesome.
So earlier on, way before the pandemic, we had started talking about developing a course specifically for online teaching, because there wasn't a lot out there. And we both kind of recognized that it feels like this is the direction in which the industry is going. And so we already had outlined this course, and then hadn't done anything else with it yet, because we were just, you know, oh, we have time. It's a very slow progression, right, to this transition to online, which sounds so funny now. But we already had this course that we'd outlined for training teachers to teach online specifically. I'm talking like bullet point outline in a notebook, like very rudimentary stages. So that was one thing. The second thing was that I had just started before the pandemic talking to a contact of mine in the industry who was opening a language school in Saudi Arabia. And he had this idea that he wanted it to be kind of a hybrid, like he would kind of Zoom in or Skype in on video calls, teachers in other parts of the world into the physical classroom in Saudi Arabia. So we were already sort of working together for me to design this curriculum for that. I was helping him as sort of a consultant and curriculum designer. So then, you know, all of these things were kind of in the background, and suddenly the pandemic hit and I was like, okay, so now we're totally online. That's the only option here. So suddenly that course about teaching online became hugely important and immediate. And then at the same time, I started working with this contact that I had, and he said, okay, well, let's go ahead with the project and let's just do it fully virtual. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I was working all the time, oddly enough. When other people were out of work, it feels strange to say, but I was every morning teaching, actually, like implementing the curriculum and designing it in Saudi Arabia. So I was waking up at like 5 a.m. to teach with them, and then developing this course for online teaching, and also CELTA training.
Right.
And the thing that I never, ever, ever thought would happen, which is CELTA going fully online, happened.
Right.
And so for the first time ever, as a CELTA trainer, I was doing completely online full-time CELTA courses. And, the trainers at that time were like learning how to do this online thing, like one step ahead of the trainees.
Yeah.
So it was a complete crash course. It was like, 7 hours a day or more, like contact hours of online teaching students and figuring out how this works. And then taking all of that I was learning and going directly into training teachers to teach online. And the turnaround was amazing. It was an amazing experience in terms of learning and professional development for me, because the turnaround was like, I'd be, doing guided lesson planning with one of my CELTA trainees, and they'd be asking me questions. And it's like, well, what I did in my lesson this morning that worked well was XYZ. So why don't you try that? And I also did this other thing yesterday that didn't work at all. So don't do that. It was, it was definitely the way to learn, by doing.
I mean, it gives a whole new meaning to what they say, fake it till you make it kind of thing. But well, informed faking it, shall we call it?
Yeah.
So yeah, like, so wow, what a baptism of fire in so many ways. I had the thought the other day that so many computer-based jobs moved home, but I think a lot of like office jobs was just taking your office and transplanting it into your house. Whereas teaching, it's part of that, but the actual teaching was happening. Like that's why I was using that word. This our medium of our classroom was this machine in front of us, kind of thing. So in some ways, I would say that teaching has adapted. I don't know how you would quantify that, but one of the most in terms of the professions that has had to adapt. What would you say in terms of like lessons learned from developing that training course and then delivering CELTA courses and teaching and just moving your entire career online? What would you say are the ways in which, and we've kind of touched on this already, but I'd like you to drill down into a little bit deeper. What would you say are the ways that it's similar, like it's just teaching, so you're still a teacher, now you're just using a computer, and what ways would you say are different, and what are the important ones that are the same, different?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I realized very quickly was that it actually does work. Like online teaching and training really does work. I was so skeptical of that before the pandemic. I really wasn't that interested in online teaching, honestly, which sounds, again, weird now to say because now I love it. So my first biggest surprise was how well it actually does work if you know what you're doing. Okay, that being said, so more specific similarities, I think really in terms of the methodology, the fundamentals of teaching, none of that really changes. Like our lessons still need to be and can be really student-centered, right? Like we can still have students have student-to-student interaction. We can still use breakout rooms for pair work and group work. We still want there to be this sort of communicative aspect to our lessons, and really all the frameworks, like the frameworks that we work with. I know you're a CELTA trainer as well. So like, the kind of CELTA frameworks that we use with our candidates, those don't really have to change much at all. Like we can still have these really nice communicative structured lessons that include tons of student engagement and participation. And I think that's where teachers get kind of stuck sometimes, is they think like, well, now that we're on video and, nobody can like get up and walk around, it means that there can't possibly be that much pair work or group work. We can't do a mingle online. You can, you just have to be creative and figure it out. So I think those are the main things. Like the basics really don't change at all. We still want to use visuals, like we can still do task-based stuff and project-based kind of learning, like all that stuff can still happen. Differences, obviously the fact that there is tech is a huge thing, right? So it's not like you can just say, turn to your partner and talk about it. You as the teacher have to be confident setting up breakout rooms, getting the students to go into them, sharing your screen, you don't have a whiteboard that you can just stick things on or write things on. So you need to think about how you're going to present visuals and materials in class. You can't just hand the students a worksheet. You have to think about how you're going to distribute those materials virtually. And even though you can still do all of those things, right? You can still distribute materials. You can still write on a whiteboard. It's just going to be a virtual whiteboard or a PowerPoint or something. So you can still do all those things, but how you do them is different. Maybe that's the biggest thing. Yeah.
As a teacher trainer and a mentor and a course designer and everything, what would you do to lower the, and this is, by the way, for everybody watching, this is an on-the-spot question, so get ready. What would you do to lower the teacher's affective filter, like their kind of negative feelings around going to tech? What would you do to soothe the affective filter, shall we say, of people who are thinking about going to tech?
That's a great question. I think first I try, so if I'm working with a teacher, for example, that feels really intimidated by all the tech, I try to encourage that teacher that like, it really doesn't take that much tech. I think sometimes we can get a little bit in our heads and think like, well, if I don't know how to use, all these 80 different things, and these, Kahoot and like online games and all this other stuff and downloading things, blah, 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 then and have a fancy webcam and, then I can't do it. But you really don't need that much. As long as you can operate Zoom, which is a little intimidating at first if you've never used it, but once you practice with it a couple of times, it's not that complicated, I would say. It just takes some practice. You don't need that much. And you can actually do quite a lot. Interactive writing exercises, mingles, pair work, stuff where the students really are engaged with pretty minimal, you can do all of that pretty much with like Google Docs. So if you can master like a couple of things, you can pretty much do everything you need to do. And you don't really need to worry about learning all these other apps and features unless you really want to. Great. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing is just practice, like, of course, it's going to feel weird and intimidating the first couple of times you try to teach online. Because it's something new like that, it'd be weird if it didn't feel a little bit scary and, you didn't kind of have your walls up a little bit. So any way that you can find to practice, like just open a Zoom meeting and poke around and see what the buttons mean and by yourself, right? Or get some friends and do some practice or family members or whatever, host a free class so the students know that it's just a test, whatever it is.
I think that's
that
awesome.
Helps too.
Yeah. Have a kind of give yourself a kind of a free dry run at it. I think that absolutely help.
Or do a course, obviously, where you're learning that stuff and getting actual live online practice with a trainer that can help you.
Absolutely. I think a course like the one that you said that you've designed there for a person who is, feeling that they need that extra or just that, like, okay, I've done this, I've been through it already, I can give you that boost of confidence. I think it's great that there are those opportunities out there. I think as well, I think about just what you were saying there. I really like that idea that you can do a lot with a little, and I'm always apt to make analogies to play music, but forgive me, but go with me at the same time. I'm a bass player myself, and you see people playing bass and they can do these incredible things, and you can't, like, their fingers look like it's a blur, you can't see it, they're moving so fast. But the greatest players, my favorite guys, the soul players, the Motown guys, their whole advice was, if you can just keep the same thing going, but regularly, and just do something very simply, it has a much bigger effect 9 times out of 10 than the incredible bells and whistles kind of thing.
Wow,
so
yeah.
That's
such a great analogy.
And and I think it's true for so many things, and it definitely applies, to what you were saying there, that you learn a couple of things. Like, if you can sign into your email, you're 85% of the way there.
Yeah, exactly.
That might sound like I'm quipping, but I promise you I'm not, because
Yeah.
what do I mean by that? So many of these tools are single sign-on, so you can actually sign into some of these tools with your Gmail, for example.
Right.
So you need
Exactly.
one thing, and then it applies
Yep.
to so many things, you know.
Yeah. I would say
Uh,
that's like everything I use still for online teaching and training pretty much is like the Google stuff. Like I use Google Docs, Google Forms, occasionally Jamboard,
right.
Zoom, and PowerPoint or Google Slides. That's it. And
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's just some simple tools, and it's every lesson is still different. Every lesson is still effective. Like I use them in different ways, but I
Mhm.
don't have to learn a whole bunch of other stuff to be effective online.
Absolutely. And I think that that kind of skill as a teacher is something that we should look to nurture in those around us and in ourselves
Mhm.
to, as I often say, do a lot with a little. You know,
Exactly.
sometimes I try to, you know, encourage trainee teachers and fellow teachers to see if you can elicit all of your vocab, for example, from one image, for example.
Yep.
The
Yeah.
reason I do that is, one, to kind of hone your skill, but also it's more likely to be much more contextualized than, for example. And I think that, you know, then, you know, you can do something like that within the technological world, and then that kind of do a lot with a little kind of approach applies as well.
Mm-hmm. So true. Yeah.
Um, so just before we kind of bring her in for a landing, as they say, what advice would you, if you were to give just one big piece of advice just on the whole technology thing, would you give to a teacher who is either trepidatious about it or is just about to go gung ho with online teaching?
Yeah. Technology specific or teaching online in general, or both?
That's both.
All right. I guess for teaching online in general, I mean, the first thing is still that you need to know how to teach. And I know that sounds maybe obvious, or maybe I don't know, but the tech isn't gonna do anything if you don't know what you're doing with the tech, right? So no matter how confident you feel, if you're great with using technology, if you've never really done it before, you still are not going to be an effective online teacher if you don't understand the methodology behind it and why you're using these tools and how you're using them and how you're setting up the lesson. So I would say, it kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of leaving school and feeling like I didn't really have this like marketable, demonstrable skill. So that's the first thing, is I think you want to feel like that about your teaching. Like your teaching is a skill that you know how to justify, and you can say exactly why you're doing every activity that you're doing in your lesson. And then you're using the tech just as the vehicle of delivering those activities, right? Or those the things that you're doing to help the students improve their language. So however you need to make that happen, I would say, is the first thing. So, get some solid training if you don't already have it. If you already feel that way, you're already at that level, great. Then the next thing is just to practice, and to figure out how to use all of those online tools to make what you already know kind of come alive and work in the virtual classroom. Like a specific example, just for what I'm talking about, like let's take a writing lesson. So we know that in a physical classroom, we want the students to be able to write their text, whatever the assignment is. And then somehow we want the other students to be able to see it, to read each other's and comment, interact with each other's writing. Well, in a physical classroom, that's pretty easy to do. How do we do that online? So, taking something that we already know how to do, we know why that's good, we know why we want the students to be doing this. It's just now using the tech to make that happen virtually. So, using Google Docs and having each student write on a different page of the same Google Doc. So when you share it, they can scroll up and down and read everybody's right, whatever it is, or different pages in Jamboard. So you can do that through kind of practice and creative thinking and trial and error. Or again, you can just do a training course and actually get hands-on practice and really good advice on how to do all of those things.
Well, Shannon, I think that, and I am, it is no platitude whatsoever. I think that's golden advice, really, because I know there are a lot of people out there, a lot of colleagues who I speak to still to this day, who are, as I say, somewhat trepidatious. And people need to hear those kinds of things, that you can do it. And whether you need a
Yeah.
little help or a lot of help, both are out there and the tools are out there. And just try it out. Trial and error is a great way. I think that's fantastic advice.
Definitely.
So if people want to find you out there in the World Wide Web and what you do and what you offer, where can people go, Shannon?
Yeah, so definitely come and check out TEFL Horizons, TEFLhorizons.com. That's the website, and that's where you'll find everything. If you're interested in connecting even more, I do pretty regular free webinars. So if you want to come and do a little bit of training and professional development, go ahead and go to TEFLhorizons.com/webinars, and then you can sign up to be notified whenever there's a new one, so you can make sure that you register. Again, they're free. You just have to register, so you get the link and you get on the list and all that stuff. You can also find me on Instagram, TEFL Horizons, so TEFL_Horizons. And then Online English Teacher is the course that I do in case you're interested in joining me for some serious online English teacher training.
Fabulous. Well, I've been to your website and I've checked out the material. I've checked out your podcast. I can't recommend it highly enough. Truly, it's
Thank you.
fantastic work. And from a person who's in the industry as well, it's great to see somebody who has that passion and that dedication to really putting out quality material. So I highly recommend it. Links will be down below. Everybody, please do click on all of them. And no, but seriously, check out Shannon's stuff. It's fantastic. Well, seriously, Shannon, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Fergus. I really appreciate our talk and getting to connect with you. And you are providing so many amazing resources for teachers as well.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully we can do this again in the future. Maybe in a few months. Let's see what's cooking in the world of ELT and let's have a chat about it.
That sounds great.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Shannon. See ya.
See ya.